What is up, everyone, and welcome back. Lineup changes, or lineup change. A phrase or phrases that many of us out there dread to hear when referencing one of our favorite bands. That they have lost a member or members of the band. Suddenly, we're overcome with a lot of different emotions. Oh my goodness, what's happened is one of the first questions. And then it's, how's the band going to sound? How much is it going to change? What's going to happen? And good, bad, or indifferent, it's going to happen regardless. But sometimes it truly affects our ability to be able to listen to the band. Sometimes it truly affects the band's sound, their songwriting, and other aspects of what they do, how they perform live. And sometimes it's for the better, sometimes it isn't. But for a lot of us, there's members of bands that we just can't move on past. And in some cases, which I'll get into, at least in my personal opinion, it's for the better. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This idea comes from my buddies Hegy and Paz over at Pictures, Noise, and Words. They've got a great channel that's very similar to what we have here. Love the guys. I've done a podcast with them. We're with Hegy and Japanese Music Nerd as well a couple of months ago. And hope to actually get a podcast with Hegy and Paz at some point in the near future. But every month or so, we're going to put up a topic. And they're going to do a video on their channel. I'll link their video. They'll link mine. And then Galactic Criminal, another killer guy. Hilarious dude. Really enjoyable. Definitely got a different take. And if anything, he's great for a heck of a laugh. Really good dude. Might also chime in and do a video and share his opinions on it as well. And this idea comes from Paz. Apparently, he was listening to Queensryche while walking his dogs, which, to be honest, I get a lot of ideas for videos I'm going to do that aren't reactions or reviews when I'm out walking my two. And he was listening to Queensryche and thought, man, I was devastated when Chris DeGarmo, the original lead guitar player and songwriter, left the band. And that inspired the video. And they put out questions out on their YouTube channel and their Twitter page, asking people about what lineups changes affected people. And there's a lot of really good ones. I'm watching the video with Hegy and Paz, and with those guys talking about it, they hit on a lot of the ones that affected me personally as well. And the obvious lineup change is a singer. Anytime you put a different voice into a band, it's going to sound different. Even if you get a guy that's similar vocally, it's going to sound different. Examples of that being Queensryche getting rid of Jeff Tate for all of his issues, and bringing in Todd LaTorre. Now, on that note, I love Todd. I think he's a fantastic singer. He's got an incredible range. He doesn't really get a chance to utilize all of it in Queensryche because he's got a nice aggressive range as well. But one of the things I love about him over Jeff Tate is he's so much more of a fan of Queensryche, and he's a fan himself. And he treats the fans of the band so much better. He's very interactive with people. He's really nice. He's really humble and not at all arrogant. You see a lot of videos where Jeff would slap people's cell phones out of the way and be rude to fans. Todd is the complete opposite. He brings cell phones up on stage. He'll film the band. He'll film from vantage points that he thinks that you might want, that he would want if he had a chance to have a band member do it. and get the fan a killer video and then give him the phone back. And it's stuff like that that makes him a fantastic singer for the band because he loves it. But a lot of people don't. I don't say a lot of people, but there is a camp that Jeff Tate is the only voice of Queensrÿche. And in his prime, I certainly agree with that. I think he was the only voice. However, Jeff lost his voice. He struggles to do a lot of that stuff live these days. And Todd does not. Todd's a little bit older than I am. And he is just killing it. And he's just fun. He's a great guy to meet. You have a chance to meet Todd LaTorre. Say hi, because he's just a really nice guy. But talking still about Queensrÿche, the guitar player, and Chris was one of the principal songwriters in the band. He wrote a lot of the early and material, a lot of the big hits. Stuff like Queen of the Reich, a lot of the stuff on Operation Mindcrime, a lot of the really big hits like Jet City Woman, Another Lonely Night, Silent Lucidity. The real big Queensrÿche anthems have Chris DeGarmo's fingerprints all over them. And in some cases, it can be a bass player. It can be a drummer. A lot of people were really bummed out when Cliff Burton was tragically killed in a bus accident on tour. Because Cliff certainly helped a lot in the writing process. Incredibly talented bass player, incredibly unique and influential bass player at the time with what he was doing. A lot of the using a bass as a lead and doing a lot of the bass solo stuff that he did in tracks like Call of Cthulhu and in Orion, and some of the live versions. You get a chance to watch the Donington live performance of For Whom the Bell Tolls, where he just starts soloing on a bass. He is insanely influential as a player, and one of the guys that made me pick up the instrument. And along with guys like Steve Harris. And Iron Maiden is absolutely another one we'll talk about. But a lot of people could not get over Cliff leaving. And no disrespect to Jason Newsted. I think Jason Newsted is an incredible bass player. He's another guy that helped inspire me to pick up the instrument. And I love how Jason played. I love how he felt. I love what he did. Very different from Cliff being a pick player as opposed to a finger player. And that poor guy just got the short end of the stick in a lot of ways. Never truly able to write. Never truly able to be what he probably could have been to the band if they would have been able to pull their heads out of their collective fourth points of contact. Otherwise, a phrase we use in the Army and the airborne school was, there's 5 points of contact, the fourth being your gluteus maximus or your ass. So they weren't able to pull their heads out of their fourth points of contact. But so many of these bands have had an impact, or these lineup changes have had impacts on us. A lot of people, myself included, will point to the changes with different guitar players for Ozzy Osbourne. Randy Rhoads being just an incredibly influential and innovative player, adding so many of those different classical elements into metal, and how he played, how he approached his riffs and some of his solos. I still listen to the track Diary of a Madman and just marvel at it. And you can tell the differences because Ozzy doesn't write. Ozzy brings in people that write for him. Ozzy might come up with a vocal melody every now and then, but if you see Ozzy songwriting credits, it's bogus. Because the actual songwriters were paid to not take credit for their writing, or in some cases, were stolen. A lot of the stuff that Bob Daisley wrote, a lot of the stuff that Lee Kerslake wrote. But the differences in guitar players from Randy to Jakey Lee to Zach to Gus, and now back to Zach. In fact, when Ozzy fired Zach, he quipped in an interview, "I got tired of my band sounding like Black Label Society." And he had an issue with that. Of course, bands didn't necessarily respond as well to Gus, and albums didn't sound as good. So Zach is back in his element, back with Ozzy, still doing the Black Label thing. Now, sober and more highly caffeinated Zach. But that lineup affected a lot of people. Another one talking about a non-vocalist band member, one that's going to be very relatable here on the channel, is the drummer changes in Coheed and Cambria. Certainly one that the more I listen to them, the more I can hear it myself, is when drummer Josh Eppard left. Was originally replaced on the record No World for Tomorrow by Taylor Hawkins, who was filling in because Chris Penny, the drummer they had hired, was not able to be on the record due to label issues. Josh has such a distinct style. The amount of mileage he gets out of a single kick is highly impressive. His feel, his fills, his accents, it's just very unique to how he plays, and trying to get other people to imitate that doesn't work. And you can hear it. You can hear it in the songwriting. You can hear it in the very much a feel thing. It's not that the other drummers aren't good or talented. Taylor Hawkins is a great drummer. Chris Penny is a very technical drummer. But if you listen to Black Rainbow, one of the things that stands out to me is you get more technique and less feel. And that's such a tough thing. So that affects people. Big one with a lot of people lately, and of course the questions still haven't been answered, is the loss of Yui Metal from Baby Metal. Her departure from the band for reasons that haven't and probably never will be announced. People are crushed because they're very attached to the band. Do I think it's going to affect the sound? In some ways, sure. But she does predominantly backing vocals. She's not the main vocalist. I mean, that's handled by Sue, and Sue has a very distinct sound to her. But that doesn't make her departure any less relevant, because fans are so attached to her as a person. And the loss of Mikio is incredibly tough. Mikio Fujikoda, who just the anniversary of his passing was yesterday, is a tough one, because man, he was just such an incredibly talented player. Everything I've seen from him and read from him interview wise, really nice, very humble, very enjoyable guy. And it was very tough for people. And of course the way he left, unfortunately dying from falling from an observation deck in an observatory, really, it just sucks. It's a terrible thing. And you know, he's a hard person, hard shoes to fill, and I don't know if they're ever going to be filled. So certainly rest in peace, and he will be missed. Another big one talking about losing fatally, dying, is Lane Stanley from Alice in Chains. Man, the band had broken up. Lane had just an incredibly long battle with drugs, and he was not shy about talking about his love affair and love-hate relationship with the junk. You hear it on tracks like Junkhead from Dirt and many other tracks. He was very, very vocal about his demons. And his addiction really affected that band in touring and them breaking up in 97. And, him passing in 2002, people not even, he became such a recluse that people didn't even know for like a week or two that he was gone. But while Alice in Chains has always predominantly been Jerry Cantrell as the principal songwriter, though Lane did write a bit, it's just not the same vocally. And I'm actually somebody that likes Will. I think Will is a great singer. I think he also really helps out their sound by being able to sing and play, and adds to their thickness live. But let's be honest, no one is going to replace Lane. It's just not going to happen, and it's heartbreaking. He's just one of those singers that it's really tough. Another singer change that I think a lot of people were affected by. I don't feel like it affected the songwriting, because, to be quite honest, it didn't. Other than a vocal dynamics perspective, is the whole Nightwish debacle. Oh yes, Tarja and her husband had issues with the band, and the band was just having trouble for a while. The band wasn't happy, and they made the decision to let Tarja go. And originally they brought in Annette Olson, and she did vocals for a couple of records. And Nightwish, during the Annette years, lost the bombastic operatic vocals that they became really known for on their earlier records. And unfortunately, eventually, some of the same issues that were cropping up with Tarja started cropping up with Annette, the much more pop-edged singer. Not that I think Annette's bad. I enjoy Dark Passion Play, and I enjoy the other records she did, but the band didn't necessarily have the same impact. Now they have Floor Jansen, and she's just an absolutely incredible singer, and is fully more than capable of singing anything that either of those two singers were capable of. But a lot of you out there never were able to get over the loss of Tarja. And I know a lot of people that I just can't listen to Nightwish anymore because the singer that I loved is gone. And it kind of sucks that but sometimes that change just doesn't click with you. I remember when Adrian Smith from Iron Maiden left and was replaced by Yannick Gears, I was upset because while Yannick's a good guitar player, I do still feel that he was a downgrade from Adrian. And I think Adrian has a very different way of writing and a different way of soloing than Yannick. Yannick is very throw a lot of notes at a problem and it'll go away, where I feel like Adrian's definitely a more stylized lead player, and I feel like his solos are definitely more well composed. And you can really tell he just has a way that he writes. So you can tell when you're listening to an Adrian penned track, it just sounds different. And then Bruce left. Well, a lot of people will actually go back even further with Maiden and say, "Oh, I don't like Bruce. I'm a Paul Di'Anno fan." A lot of people like that very yelpy punk edge of the first couple of Maiden records. Personally, I've never been a Paul Di'Anno fan. I will never be a Paul Di'Anno fan, and I came in with Bruce, and I love Bruce. And I actually really liked Blaze. I think Blaze Bailey, who came over from Wolfsbane, was a great singer. But talk about a drastic departure in styles of vocals. You have this massive voice in Bruce, this big air raid siren screaming to the heavens, and then you've got Blaze, this really deep, rich bass tone singer that is very opposite of Bruce and Paul, both. And a lot of people didn't like it. Personally, I think both the records that Blaze did were fantastic, and I still get stuff like Sign of the Cross and Heart of Darkness stuck in my head. But that was a tough one for people. The loss of Bruce and the shifting over to Blaze. But of course, that got rectified back in 2000 when not only Bruce came back, but Adrian Smith came back, and Iron Maiden now have 3 ridiculously talented guitar players and Bruce. And life has been good ever since. You look at the other big name there, you look at Judas Priest, and the change to Rob. Well, Rob is the quintessential singer of Judas Priest. He really is. He's what the majority of people think about. They don't think of Al Atkins. They think of Rob Halford. And when Rob decided to leave and they brought in Tim Owens, a lot of people were very upset about that. And personally, I wasn't. I didn't. Gonna get some people to ground here, but I wasn't a huge Halford fan. It actually really took. I liked Priest, but it took me hearing Tim to really be able to get into it. When Tim Ripper Owens stepped in and filled Rob's shoes, and it finally was one of the catalysts to truly get me into that style of vocal. And I like him. I still love Ripper. He's still one of my favorite singers out there. I think he's just amazing, and the guy's got a ridiculous range. But it affected the band. Well, you don't have Rob Halford anymore, so you're not really Judas Priest. So places weren't booking him as much. Fans were less than happy about seeing Tim as opposed to Rob, even though Tim is capable of singing similarly. Tim's actually got a bigger range than Rob does. But it's another one of those things where fans just couldn't grasp onto it, and a lot of people refused to listen to the stuff from the Ripper era. Sticking with the Ripper theme here, Matt Barlow departing Iced Earth the first time. Iced Earth are a band that is really very much the product of guitar player John Schaefer. Much like Nightwish is the project of Thomas Hoplin, or Megadeth is the Dave Mustaine project, Nine Inch Nails is Trent Reznor, etc., etc. And the musicians in Iced Earth Well, John changes them a lot like people change their underwear. Very, very frequently. There's a period where it just seemed like band members were being changed from ice to earth every couple of weeks. And eventually, they got the first couple singers I didn't like at all. Didn't like the guy on the first record to the point where it was Gene something or somewhat. To the point where honestly I don't remember the guy's name. Didn't like John Greeley on Storm Rider either. And Matt Barlow came into the fold. Big, deep voice singer, really powerful in the highs. Suddenly, Iced Earth have a singer. And a really, really, really good singer. And did some fantastic records. But 03 comes around. They're working on the Glorious Burden record. John Schaefer's not happy with it. Matt Barlow's not happy, thinking about career change. Eventually became a Delaware State Trooper. And John got rid of him. Hired Tim Ripper Owens from Judas Priest, who had just left Priest because Robin decided to come back, which is completely understandable. So Tim comes into the fold. And Tim doesn't have the same mid-range to the lower register that Matt does. And a lot of people did not like that. It was, well, Matt's not here. And eventually, Tim was fired via email of all things, because John Schaefer is just not the most professional guy out there in the world. And he convinced Matt to come back. Matt being his brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken. I do believe that Matt married John's sister many moons ago. And Matt came back for a couple of records. And then they just realized that they wanted to do Iced Earth more. They couldn't really work around Matt's schedule, so Matt left a second time. And they brought in one of my favorite all-around vocalists in metal, a guy named Stu Block, who was singing for the band Into Eternity. And Stu is ridiculous. Absolutely phenomenal singer. Incredibly dynamic. Tons of range, both clean and aggressive. And I think a lot of people, while they still miss Matt, a lot of people have truly latched on to Stu because the guy is such an amazing singer. And he kind of gives you a bit of the different eras of the band. He's able to do a lot of the Ripper high stuff. He's able to utilize this rich mid part of his range and sing a lot like Matt. So people kind of get that as well, and he's able to tackle the Matt songs in a way that Matt might possibly do. So that was a big one. Some new ones in the VK scene, so I certainly don't want to miss all you VK fans out there. This one's recent. The issues with Deviloof. Deviloof suddenly lost guitarist Seiya and drummer Hiroto. And unfortunately, there was a lot of complications and issues, and they departed. Now, that's going to be really interesting because Seiya certainly wrote a lot, from what I understand, and was a really integral writing member. And it's going to be interesting to see how Deviloof starts to sound. Though Twitter conversations between Seiya and Hiroto are promising, I'm certainly hoping that they come back together, do another project, because I really like the Deviloof stuff, and I really like the way those two write. So fingers are crossed. They're crossed that we get a new project featuring Seiya and Hiroto. Another one recently that's certainly going to affect the band in some way is the departure of Kazqui from Nocturnal Bloodlust. And he actually just recently formed the new band Neko Banju. And it's really interesting. You look at the lineup here. You've got former Kashin Ichigeki vocalist Kota, guitarist Kazqui, bassist Shingo Star from Sex Machine Guns, and drummer Fumiya of Galnerius, Thousand Eyes, and Unlucky Morpheus. So that's going to be pretty awesome. And it'll be curious to see how things happen with Nocturnal Bloodlust, because Kazqui, from what I understand, is responsible for a lot of the songwriting. And that's always really, really tough when you lose a principal member of a band, a songwriting member of a band. And vocalists can certainly affect the sound if they're just because their sound, the vocalist is going to be very different to one another, but the writing might stay pretty similar with Nightwish, like with Iced Earth, like with Megadeth when Megadeth changes members, or anytime Death changed members, because you still have that principal songwriter. Another Japanese band I know that people have different opinions on is Aldius. Some people really couldn't get past vocalist Rami. They really struggled and didn't like Reno as much. And that was a big one. I've seen a lot of that pop up here on the channel in comments, people talking about how they prefer Rami over Reno. Getting into some of the really heavier stuff here. Fear Factory. Big Fear Factory fan, industrial metal band, lots of highly innovative, highly influential. And it really was driven by vocalist Burton C. Bell and guitar player Dino Cesaris being the main members of the band. Well, they wound up having issues. Surprise, surprise. They go on hiatus, and then they decide to reform without Dino. Suddenly, bass player Christian O'Walbers is playing guitar. And personally, Transgression and Archetype just didn't sound right to me. They just didn't sound like what you expect from the band. You know, the writing from Dino just wasn't there. I think Christian did an admirable job of trying to imitate Dino, but he wasn't Dino. Just didn't have that feel for the writing. Eventually, Burton and Dino changed and reformed, and now they continue to write together and they continue to put out new music. A band that I personally have stopped listening to since the latest vocalist change is Arch Enemy. Unlike some, a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but there is a group of people out there, fans, that stopped listening to Arch Enemy when they lost original vocalist Johan Leva. Arch Enemy was formed by former Carcass guitar player Mike Amott, and First couple of records were done with singer Johan Leva, who some people like. To me, I felt he was just kind of too monotone as a singer. Didn't have a lot of dynamics to his voice, and they really clicked with me when they released the album Wages of Sin in 2001, which was the first record to feature vocalist Angela Gossow, who is now married to Mike Amott and managing the band and others, though I guess the issues with her management will certainly be another video, though. There have been some of that in the news lately. Though eventually she decided to stop singing and become the manager. So they brought in vocalist Alyssa White-Glues from the Agony scene. And to be quite honest, personally, I have not liked either record. I find them very bland and very paint by numbers. Though I will be honest, I don't think I've truly enjoyed a record since Rise of Tyrants back in 2007. I really was not a fan of War Eternal and Will to Power at all, though I have tried. Another one that really divides fans, if you're looking at the thrash scene, is Anthrax. There's the camp that loves Joey Belladonna, and then there's the camp that doesn't love Joey Belladonna and likes John Bush. Personally, I'm in the John Bush camp. Big fan of the band Armored Saint, and not necessarily a fan of Joey's voice. I liked some of the stuff off Among the Living, but truly the record that did it for me is when I first heard Sound of White Noise and heard John with Anthrax and just felt that power, that real intensity, and just the anger and the rage and just that deeper, rich vocal. I felt like Anthrax was a much better band with John Bush in the lineup. Eventually, John got swapped out again in favor of Joey, and then Joey left again, and they replaced him with Dan Nelson. And then Joey came back. It's definitely a love-hate relationship there. Some people really don't like any era other than the Joey era, and some people don't really like anything other than the John Bush era. So it's really interesting how that works. Tell you what, talk about a band that a lot of people don't know with the earlier singer, but really benefited from changing singers. This little known Texas-based band called Pantera. Believe it or not, if you don't know, Pantera used to be a crotch rock band. They were very much glam. And they had a singer named Terry Glaze. They released some stuff. And then eventually, I want to say it was 88. I should have looked it up. But they released an album called Power Metal. Which, good luck finding a copy. You might be able to find it on YouTube. First record with Phil Anselmo. Changing singers, changing their sound, and changing their image, especially at that time as glam was starting to lose its luster and the trend was dying. They went heavier, and suddenly Pantera became world crushers. They were a band doing something that people didn't expect. They were nasty, they were raunchy, they were heavy, they were aggressive. And they blew up. They just exploded. If Cowboys started building the engine, Vulgar continued it, and Far Beyond Driven just blew that band to commercial stardom. Next thing you know, they're headlining arenas. They're destroying Europe, and they've become absolutely legendary. And they were doing it at a time in the mid to late 90s where mainstream metal was struggling with the advent of grunge and a lot of people rebelling against technique and a lot of what was happening with the sugary, sweet, polished music they were being fed mainstream wise with glam. Even a lot of your thrash bands at the time, looking at Metallica, I'm looking at Megadeth, I'm looking at Exodus, did records that were very grungy and alternative. So for Pantera to be able to do what they did in that time period with a different lineup was highly impressive. Look at another band that really changed with the lineup and is also controversial in some ways is a band called Corrosion of Conformity. They were very much a crossover hardcore band at first. And eventually they got in singer, guitar player Pepper Keenan, and they became much more of a southern rock, almost stoner, Sabbath influenced metal band. You still hear a little bit of that crossover influence on Blind, but by the time you got into Deliverance, they were in Wiseblood, they were just cranking out tasty slabs of southern fried metal, and a lot of people couldn't wrap their heads around that. You know, it's always really interesting how people feel about singers. With a lesser known band, one of my personal favorites, you get that a lot with a band called Sabotage, which some of you might know, and others of you might not know that that Sabotage formed a band called Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Yes, you ever thought, man, Trans-Siberian Orchestra sounds like a metal band? Because they are a metal band. They're a band called Sabotage. And Sabotage was originally formed by brothers John and Chris Oliva out of Tampa. John sang for many years until he unfortunately started having personal issues and label issues. And they had to change. They had to get a new singer for multiple reasons. And they got a very different singer. They got a guy named Zach Stevens, who I love. But a lot of people, I was listening to Hegy and Paz talk about it. Paz struggled to latch on to John. Or not John, but struggled to latch on to Zach at first. And understandable. You know, very different singers, very different styles. You guys want to hear a really good version of the two of them singing together, I'll put a link to the Live in Japan version of a track called Gutter Ballet with both Zach and John on vocals. And it is fantastic. Another loss for that band was tragic loss, was guitar player Chris Oliva being killed on the way to a show and being hit by a drunk driver. Eventually they turned to guitar player Alex Skolnick from Testament, and he did some stuff. He did one record. They wound up getting Al Pitrelli. There's a lot of people that won't listen to post John and won't listen to post Chris Sabotage. Personally, I feel like you're missing out a lot, because I think that all the eras of that band have a lot to offer. And I still think there's a couple of stinkers in the Sabotage catalog with John on vocals. I think Power of the Night and Fight for the Rock are pretty terrible, personally. But that's me. God, there's so many bands out there we could talk about. We talked about all the different lineup changes for Halloween. Talk about the stuff going on with the changes with Whitesnake, the changes with Morbid Angel, changing vocalists from David Vincent to Steve Tucker. A lot of people railed against the changes some people didn't like. Tucker's voice, some people didn't like it when Tucker left and David Vincent came back. Another good one from the metalcore scene is a band called Killswitch Engage. I got into the band with Jesse, who did the first 2 records, Self-Release and Alive and Just Breathing. And unfortunately, due to depression, he left the band and got replaced by that soulful beast known as Howard Jones. Big, massive vocal on a very big, massive man. Some people at first didn't like him. Some people never will. Some people are like, man, he's better than Jesse. I'm so happy he's here. And he got more crooning, ballady love songs out of him as opposed to more social lyrics. Much more about heartbreak and loss and happy love songs or sad, happy love songs. But eventually Howard started having problems, blowing his voice out like Jesse did. And he got depressed and left the band, or got fired from the band. I remember when that announcement happened, people were freaking out. Oh my goodness, Howard's gone. It's going to be terrible. And then Jesse came back. And some people still want Howard back. Personally, I like Jesse. I like him a lot. I'm happy with either of those guys singing. They're both phenomenal vocalists. They both have their own sound. I think Jesse's done a good job of adapting Howard's songs to his voice. And I think Howard did a great job of adapting songs to Jesse. Or Jesse's songs to his voice. So I think both those vocalists really do a lot of justice on each other's material. And they did a great job. You know, I'd love to talk about more Visual K stuff, but I'm still learning it. So I can't talk to that as much. I'm sure the Visual K contingent here and the Japanese band fans out here in subscriber land will certainly talk a bit more, and I will learn more about the bands that you guys really felt didn't, or the lineup changes you didn't like or didn't measure up, or the ones that you thought were better. I know I missed a lot of symphonic metal singers, so Scott might be a little mad at me. I do apologize, man. There's a lot of changes there, and there's a few that I don't necessarily remember off the top of my head. I probably should have thought about that a little more. One from Japanese Music Nerd, which I actually disagree with a bit, is he was a much bigger fan of the band The Haunted with Peter Dolving singing. And personally, I'm not as much of a fan of Peter Dolving. I didn't like his voice as much. I've always preferred the aggression and tone of vocalist Marco Arno, who came in on One Kill Wonder, and who eventually wound up replacing Peter Dolving. Peter Dolving eventually came back, and Marco left. And that circle of life once again happened, and now Marco is back singing for The Haunted again. Personally, I prefer his voice. But completely understandably, JMN likes Peter more. And a lot of that really boils down to personal preference. A lot of it boils down to the attachment we form to a band and how we hear things. So it's always really interesting. And I'm really thankful that the guys from Pictures, Noise, and Words brought it up and allowed me to be part of the conversation. So, what are your favorite vocalists? Or not vocalists, but what bands that changed lineups, changed members really affected you? I want to know. Let me know in the comments. Please feel free to go over and check out Pictures, Noise, and Words and Hegy's and Paz's video on it. I'll certainly leave a link in the comments. These videos are going to be a bit longer because I do want to try to get in and talk about some of the stuff that they addressed a bit as well. I know Rabid was saying that he didn't, or that with Megadeth, the departure of Marty Friedman really affected how he listened to the band, and I can completely agree there because Marty's a very different player. And I think that even with Kiko, who's now in the band, I think that Marty is still a predominant player. And there's one more that I completely forgot to mention, and I certainly shouldn't, is the band Sepultura. Sepultura suffered a loss when Max Calavera, or Cavalera, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to pronounce that. I'm sure I'm going to get yelled at, but that's okay. I can handle it. But there wound up being issues with his wife, Gloria, and the management, so they fired her, and then Max decided, because he didn't want to be without his wife, and he wasn't happy with it, he left. Suddenly, one of the founding members of Sepultura is no longer in the band. And they replaced him with Derek Green. Now, Derek's an awesome dude. He really is. He's a really nice guy, really humble guy, really fun dude. And he makes me feel small because he's a big, big man. But some people don't like Sepultura without Max. Personally, I think Derek still sounds great. And I think he does the early stuff very well. But they don't bill as high anymore because they don't have Max back in the band. There is a lot of that nostalgia with the band lineup from a marketing perspective, which is a completely different ball of wax. And we probably should see if I can't plug Hegy and Paz to talk about that, how lineups and versions of bands truly affect their marketability and booking and all that that massive, terrible quagmire of booking and promotion in different parts of the world. Because that's just it's a pain in and of itself. But that's another big one, was Sepultura and the change from Max to Derek. And of course, Korn giving head to God. That was a big one. Yes, I couldn't resist. Yes, I actually used to own that shirt, by the way. There was a shirt that said Korn gave head to God. The departure of Brian Head Welch to become Christian, and eventually the departure of drummer David Silveria. Now, David's a good dude, really nice guy, really loves the troops. But honestly, then adding Ray Luzier on drums was fantastic because Ray's a beast. Just a monstrous player. And eventually, things come full circle, and Brian came back in the band, and they're actually writing decent stuff, even though they still are changing. And even though I wasn't a Korn fan, I find some of their new stuff tolerable. I know some people were a bit bummed about Slipknot getting rid of Joey, and the way Joey's claiming that they fired him. They fired him via email, which, well, being a Nice Earth fan, that doesn't surprise me at all. Firing somebody via email is kind of John Schaefer's thing. Or band members finding out they're fired on the internet. I'm trying to think of who it was, but band members finding out they were fired via Blabbermouth. Certainly see that with a lot of bands that Shawn Nichols, otherwise known as Sheldon Tarsha, has fronted different versions of Quiet Riot and that stuff. And actually talking about that, the utter fall of Skid Row after Sebastian Bach left the band. I love the first couple of records. Haven't listened to anything since, or haven't really been a fan of anything since. And they just struggled mightily without Sebastian. They're not marketable. They play tiny little places. And due to no real fault of the vocalists, the writing just hasn't been good in a long time. But that's all from me, guys. This has been fun. I don't even know how long this is going to be. So bear with me. I love you. Thank you. I hope you give me a ton of feedback. Go check out those guys if you haven't over at Pictures, Noise, and Words. Eventually, we'll get some scheduling worked out. We'll do a podcast together. I'll put it up on my channel. I'll let them put it up on their channel. And we might do one every now and then, because the three of us can certainly talk for hours and give you guys something to do, just hang out and listen to when you want to get your your picture's noise and word, and your Baldman Reacts fix. And or just forget it. I need to hack Reacts out of the logo at some point. Just be Baldman. But anyway, another story, another time. I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you to my law enforcement, military veterans, and first responders. As always, you have been awesome. I have been Baldman, otherwise known as Brett. I will see you in the next one. I love you. Be excellent to each other. Keep headbanging.